The airplane hummed with the everyday buzz of a long domestic flight, passengers settling into their routines, when a single moment threatened to shatter the calm. At first glance, the flight attendant seemed like any other hard-working crew member, smiling politely as she moved down the aisle, ensuring everyone's needs were met. But beneath that veneer, something was brewing that would soon spiral out of control. In the midst of a routine check, the conversation with one family, a Black family struggling with hardship, took an unexpected turn. Their tired eyes and weary smiles told a story of resilience in the face of economic challenges, a silent narrative of a family simply trying to get by. However, instead of offering the compassion one might expect in a moment of vulnerability, the flight attendant's words struck a harsh and dismissive tone that shocked everyone on board. In those few fleeting moments, what should have been a brief exchange of courtesy became an incident that cut deeply into the fabric of respect and decency. Passengers watched in stunned silence as the flight attendant's remarks grew sharper, her tone laced with an unmistakable disdain. It was as if a switch had been flipped and the normal rules of kindness had been abandoned. The family, already burdened by their struggles, sat speechless, their faces etched with disbelief and hurt. The scene quickly escalated into a tense standoff between what one might call an act of negligence and an unanticipated betrayal of trust. The flight, meant to be a space of safe transit, had suddenly turned into a stage for a confrontation that no one could have foreseen. Within minutes, the ripple effect of the incident reached the upper echelons of the airline's hierarchy. The CEO, known for his unwavering commitment to fairness and respect, had been monitoring the situation. In a decisive move that sent shockwaves throughout the cabin, he took immediate action. The abrupt termination of the flight attendant not only underscored the company's zero-tolerance policy toward discrimination, but also left everyone wondering about the chain of events that led to such a dramatic outcome. Who could have imagined that a routine flight could turn into a turning point in someone's career? As whispers of the incident filled the air, passengers were left grappling with mixed emotions, anger, sorrow, and a burning curiosity about what would unfold next. In this gripping episode that blurs the lines between personal accountability and corporate responsibility, one question remains hanging in the balance. What are the deeper implications of a momentary lapse in judgment on an entire community's sense of dignity? The stage is now set for a deeper exploration into the events that transpired, promising revelations that challenge our understanding of respect, justice, and redemption. The cabin remained eerily quiet in the aftermath of what had just unfolded. Passengers exchanged uneasy glances, some whispering among themselves, while others kept their eyes fixed on the shaken family. The mother, her hands gripping the armrests tightly, stared blankly ahead, as if trying to process the humiliation they had just endured. The father shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his jaw clenched, his expression torn between anger and the need to remain composed for the sake of his children. The little girl, no older than 6, clung to her mother's side, confused by the sudden shift in energy around her. The boy, slightly older, sat stiffly, his wide eyes darting between his parents and the now absent flight attendant. He had never seen his mother look so small, so defeated. It all had happened so fast. One moment, they had simply asked for a minor accommodation, a small request that any other passenger could have made without issue. But instead of the usual professionalism expected from a flight crew member, they were met with cold indifference. The flight attendant's response had been curt at first, dismissing their request as if it were unworthy of her attention. But when the mother had politely pressed the issue, the woman's tone changed entirely. Her words, sharp and condescending, cut through the air with a sting that made nearby passengers shift uncomfortably in their seats. She didn't just refuse them, she made them feel lesser for even asking. A few people had witnessed the exchange from the beginning, but by the time her words grew louder, the entire section of the plane was paying attention. Gasps rippled through the rows as it became clear that this wasn't just about airline policy or a misunderstanding. There was something more beneath the surface, an unspoken bias, an assumption, a judgment. A businessman sitting nearby furrowed his brows, appalled at the lack of professionalism. A young woman across the aisle gripped her phone, unsure whether she should start recording. It was the kind of moment people only hear about but never expect to witness firsthand. Then, just as the tension had reached a breaking point, the unexpected happened. A voice crackled over the intercom, firm, direct, and commanding attention. It wasn't the pilot, nor was it another flight attendant attempting to de-escalate the situation. It was someone no one had anticipated, the CEO himself. His words carried an authority that left no room for doubt. He had been made aware of the incident, and he was not about to let it slide. The decision came swiftly, sending a wave of shock through the passengers. But even as the flight attendant was escorted away, questions lingered in the air. How had he found out so quickly? And more importantly, what would happen next? As the stunned passengers watched the flight attendant disappear behind the curtain leading to the galley, whispers and murmurs filled the air. Some people shook their heads in disbelief, while others exchanged knowing looks, as if acknowledging an unfortunate reality they had seen before. The mother shifted in her seat, exhaling a deep breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She looked down at her daughter, running a comforting hand over the child's curls. The father, still tense, stared ahead, his mind replaying the incident over and over. He had wanted to stand up, to say something, to defend his family more forcefully. But experience had taught him that situations like these could spiral out of control in an instant. Across the aisle, the young woman who had gripped her phone earlier now sat frozen, her fingers hovering over the screen. She had captured part of the incident, but she hesitated to post it. Would sharing this moment help or make things worse? Was it even her place to do so? Her heart pounded as she wrestled with the decision, knowing that in today's world, a single video could ignite outrage, or just as easily, be dismissed as yet another forgotten moment of injustice. A few rows ahead, the businessman who had witnessed everything adjusted his tie, his mind torn between the ethics of corporate responsibility and the reality of what he had just seen. As a frequent flyer, he had always trusted this airline, believing in its reputation for professionalism. But now he couldn't shake the thought that if the CEO had been so quick to act, it meant he knew this wasn't just about one bad employee, it was about the bigger picture. He pulled out his laptop, instinctively opening his email. He had contacts in high places, and maybe this was something worth discussing. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, the captain had been briefed on the situation. Though his focus remained on flying the plane safely to its destination, he couldn't ignore the tension brewing in the cabin. The crew, now one member short, exchanged uneasy glances. They had seen their colleague act out of line, but none of them had expected things to escalate so quickly. Some of them worried about what would happen when they landed. Would there be reporters? A scandal. Would the airline take a hit because of one person's actions? And then it was the question no one could shake. How had the CEO found out so quickly? Some assumed a passenger had contacted the airline, but others whispered about a deeper reason. Did he know something about this flight attendant that the others didn't? Had there been complaints before? The unanswered questions only made the tension grow, leaving everyone on edge as they waited to see what would happen next. The air felt thick with anticipation. The businessman leaned forward, watching closely. The mother's heart pounded in her chest as she instinctively shielded her children. The young woman with the phone was now fully recording, her screen shaking slightly from the adrenaline rushing through her. Then, the flight attendant spoke. "I want to say something," she said, her voice eerily steady. The other flight attendants stiffened. The supervisor took a step forward, ready to intervene, but she held up a hand. "I know I've been dismissed," she continued, glancing toward the back of the plane where the family sat, "and I know why." A murmur ran through the passengers. Was she about to apologize, make a scene, try to justify herself? No one could tell. Then she turned, slowly, deliberately, toward the businessman. "You," she said, her voice carrying through the cabin. "I know who you are." A stunned silence fell over the plane. The businessman's jaw tightened. He said nothing, but his eyes gave away the fact that he wasn't as surprised as he should have been. The young woman recording swallowed hard. She hadn't expected this. No one had. This wasn't just about one family anymore. This was about something bigger, something no one had seen coming. The entire plane seemed to hold its breath. The businessman's fingers curled around the armrest, but his expression remained controlled, unreadable. The flight attendant, still standing in the aisle, let her words linger in the air, watching him carefully. Passengers exchanged puzzled glances. What did she mean? How did she know him? And why did it feel like there was more to this story than anyone realized? The young woman with the phone kept recording, her pulse racing. She could feel the tension thickening, like the moment before a storm. The mother and father watched in silence, their own troubles momentarily overshadowed by this strange turn of events. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom again, this time sharper. "Miss, you have been relieved of duty. Please return to the galley immediately." But she didn't move. Instead, she crossed her arms and faced the businessman directly. "You've sat there this whole time, watching, listening, but you haven't said a word. I wonder why." A shift rippled through the cabin. Some passengers turned toward the businessman, curiosity flickering in their eyes. He exhaled slowly, then finally spoke. "I don't know what you're trying to imply," he said, his voice measured, "but this is not the time or place." The flight attendant tilted her head slightly. "No." Her lips pressed into a thin smile. "You think I don't remember you? Years ago, before you were sitting in first class, before you became some high-level executive, you were in a situation not so different from theirs." She nodded toward the family in the back. "You know exactly how it feels to be dismissed, to be treated like you don't belong, and yet you sat there and said nothing." A heavy silence filled the plane. The businessman's grip on the armrest tightened, but his expression gave nothing away. The mother and father looked at him now, something unreadable in their eyes. Even the young woman recording felt an unexpected chill. Then the final twist came. The CEO's voice returned over the intercom. "Security will be escorting the dismissed employee off the aircraft upon landing." A pause. "And to the passengers involved in this incident, rest assured, this matter is far from over." The businessman turned away, his gaze fixed out the window. The flight attendant let out a slow breath, then stepped back into the galley without another word. As the plane continued its journey, the tension remained, lingering between the seats, between the unspoken truths and the unexpected connections. Because in the end, this wasn't just about one incident. It was about choices, about power, and about who decides to stand up, and who chooses to stay silent. The tension didn't fade, even as the plane began its descent. Passengers remained deep in thought, processing what had just happened. The mother glanced at her husband, silently checking if he was okay. He gave her a reassuring nod, but his eyes still held the weight of what they had endured. Their son had loosened his grip on the seatbelt, though he still looked unsure. The little girl, too young to fully understand, rested her head against her mother's arm, comforted by her presence. The businessman sat still, staring out the window as the city lights came into view. He didn't say another word. Maybe the flight attendant had been right. Maybe he had seen himself in that family. But for whatever reason, he had chosen silence instead of action. And now it was too late to change that. The air inside the cabin felt heavier now, thick with unspoken words and lingering tension. The mother adjusted her daughter's small backpack at their feet, her hands slightly trembling. The father glanced at her, his voice low but firm. "You okay?" She nodded, but they both knew the answer wasn't that simple. Their son, sitting stiffly beside them, was still gripping his seatbelt as if bracing for impact, not the kind from turbulence, but the kind that shakes something deeper inside. Passengers continued to steal glances at the family, their expressions ranging from sympathy to quiet anger. The businessman up front had stopped typing his email, his mind circling back to what he had seen. He had spent years negotiating high-stakes deals, watching power dynamics play out in boardrooms. But there was something raw about this moment that unsettled him. He glanced toward the front of the plane, where the flight attendant had vanished. The weight of the CEO's decision loomed over everyone, leaving them wondering if this was truly over, or if there was more to come. The young woman with the phone finally made her choice. She wasn't going to post the video, at least not yet. Instead, she opened her notes app and began typing out what she had witnessed, every detail fresh in her mind. If anyone ever tried to twist the truth, she wanted to be ready. But as she wrote, she noticed something strange. 2 other flight attendants, both visibly shaken, were whispering near the front of the plane. Their eyes darted toward the curtain leading to the galley, then back at each other. Something wasn't right. Then, suddenly, the intercom crackled again. This time, it wasn't the CEO's voice. It was the captain. "Ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate your patience. We are currently in communication with airline leadership regarding an ongoing personnel matter. Please remain in your seats as we ensure a smooth resolution." His words were carefully chosen, but there was an edge to his voice, a tightness that hinted at something more going on behind the scenes. Passengers exchanged glances, confusion spreading through the cabin. What did he mean by ongoing personnel matter? Hadn't the flight attendant already been removed from duty? The businessman sat up straighter, his instincts kicking in. Something was happening beyond what they could see. And then, the curtain at the front of the plane rustled. A crew member stepped out, pale-faced, her hands clenched together. Her voice was barely above a whisper as she leaned toward another attendant. "She's refusing to leave the plane." A cold silence swept through the rows. The mother instinctively pulled her daughter closer, the father shifting protectively beside her. The young woman with the phone gripped it tightly, her pulse quickening. The businessman's eyes narrowed. This wasn't over, not even close. A ripple of unease spread through the cabin. The whispers grew louder as passengers processed what they had just overheard. The flight attendant, the one who had insulted the family and been fired on the spot, was still on board, refusing to leave. The mother's grip tightened around her daughter as she exchanged a worried glance with her husband. The businessman adjusted his watch, a nervous habit, his mind racing with possibilities. The young woman with the phone shifted in her seat, her thumb hovering over the record button. Something about this situation felt unpredictable, and she wanted to be ready. Up front, near the galley, 2 flight attendants spoke in hushed tones, their faces tense. A supervisor had been called, but even that hadn't been enough to make her leave. She was still inside the small crew area, standing her ground. No one knew exactly what she had said, but judging by the anxious looks on the faces of the staff, it wasn't good. Then, just as the tension reached its peak, the curtain swung open. The fired flight attendant stepped out, but she wasn't frantic or angry, or pleading her case. She was calm, too calm. Her uniform was still perfectly in place, and her expression unreadable. Slowly, she looked around the cabin, her eyes scanning the passengers as if searching for something or someone. The CEO had made his decision, but his final words echoed in everyone's minds. This matter is far from over. It left people wondering, what would happen next? Would policies change? Would this moment make a difference? Or would it all be forgotten by the next flight, the next news cycle? As the family stood up to leave, a few passengers gave them small nods of support, a quiet acknowledgement that they had been seen, that their experience had mattered. And maybe, just maybe, that was the first step toward something better. As they walked toward the exit, the little girl looked up at her mother. "Are we going home now?" Her mother smiled softly, squeezing her hand. "Yes, sweetheart, we're going home."